Hey friends! I am coming at you from the other side of my filming room. I'm sitting at my desk and the sun is piercing my retinas. So I apologize in advance. The sun is going down, so it'll probably get darker in here in a bit. I'll try to adjust the lighting as we go. I really wanted to make this video for you. I have actually filmed this video twice already, and both times technical difficulties did me in, which was very frustrating. But I really wanted to go through the just over 100 books that I read in 2023 and rank them all for you. I thought that would be fun and interesting. I really like watching tier ranking videos, so I wanted to try making my own. So that's what this video is. Hopefully it'll be fun and you'll enjoy it. And if you do, let me know. I'm not going to do a full review of every single book as I rank it because that would take forever, but I will try to give, a couple words about why I'm ranking them the way I am. And then you can go check out either my one sentence reviews videos where I review every single one of these in a sentence. That's a two-parter, or you can go take a look at my Goodreads. And of course, quite a few of these were included in reading vlogs throughout the year, so there's that as well. But anyway, without further ado, let's look at the categories. The top one, the very best, is Shout It From the Rooftops, and this is for books that I cannot stop talking about, books that I will not shut up about, that I've mentioned in so many videos that are completely irrelevant to this particular book. I just shoehorn it in over and over again because I can't stop talking about it and I won't stop. Then we have no notes. This is for books that maybe I'm not quite as obsessed with, but I genuinely have zero notes. They were fantastic. I really don't have anything critical to say. Maybe I have a tiny little nitpick, but basically no notes at all. Then we have There Are 10 But, and this is for books that would have been perfect, would have been no notes, but there's that one thing that really stands out that I can't just ignore. So this is for books that were so close and yet so far. They had one major issue. Then we have I'm serving hashtag the best I can do right now in this situation, which is a quote from Drag Race. Jaden Dior Fierce. I've been rewatching some of the older seasons of Drag Race recently. They're a great pick-me-up. So I just love this quote. I think it's so perfect for so many situations where you're just like, listen, it may not be great, but I'm doing my best. Sometimes you can only do what you can do. So this is for books that I'm like, okay, they have their flaws, definitely. But I think they're doing the best they can in this situation, and good for them, honestly. Next up, we have the second to last category, which is choices, which is another Drag Race quote from the iconic Tatiana. And I feel like this is pretty self-explanatory. This is for books that certainly made choices, and I have thoughts. Most of them are probably not positive. Then the very final category, the bottom of the totem pole, is What a Terrible Day to Have Eyes, which I feel is probably the most self-explanatory of a series of very self-explanatory labels for these tiers. This is for books that I wish I could scrape out of my brain, but unfortunately I cannot. So those are our categories, and without further ado, let's get to categorizing all these books. Starting with Black Sheep. This is a book I read for my Goodreads Choice Awards nominees video, so you can check that out if you want to hear more of my thoughts. But this one, I ended up giving it 3 stars. It was okay, could have been better. It didn't really go far enough for me in any direction. It had some interesting themes, but it just didn't really deliver on them for me. It wasn't what I was hoping for going into it. So I'm going to say I'm serving hashtag the best I can do right now in the situation. I feel like the author, from what I've heard since reading this, the author is sort of known, as far as I can tell, for writing cozier horror. So within the confines of cozy horror, I think she did probably just about the best she could do in that situation. But I think if she'd allowed herself to push the boundaries more, we could have had something a little more memorable. Okay, then we have The Reformatory, read for the same video. This one was fantastic. I loved it. 5 stars. And I'm going to put it in no notes because I genuinely have no notes. I thought this book was amazing. Highly recommend. Then we have Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. I read this with my book club, and this was fantastic. This is my second James Baldwin, and both that I have read from him have been fantastic, incredible, ridiculously good. So I'm going to put this in no notes as well. Absolutely fantastic, a classic. Please go read it if you haven't read it yet. Then we have Sisters of the Lost Nation. This is a book that I started for that same Goodreads Choice Awards horror nominee video, and I didn't end up having time to finish it, so I finished it after the video. And this one was amazing. I gave it 5 stars. It made me very emotional. I cried a lot while reading it, and then also at the end to the point where my husband was concerned for my well-being. So I am gonna put this one in I think I'm going to put it in no notes as well. I might move some of these up to shout it from the rooftops, but right now I feel like these three, I haven't been forcing them down everyone's throats or talking everyone's ears off about them. I don't think I've recommended them to every single person I know. I've definitely recommended them to people, and I'm sure I've talked about them. Y'all can let me know if I'm wrong, and some of these I've talked about way too much and I haven't even realized it. I wouldn't be surprised. But for now, they're sitting there. Okay, next we have The Gilda Stories, which is a Black feminist lesbian vampire story that takes place over the course of many years, many decades, and really focuses in on the experience of being a Black woman in America through history. It's a cult classic, and I really liked it, even though it's not exactly what I had expected going into it. And I personally didn't love the ending that was added at the 25th anniversary. It was interesting, but I kind of feel like it could have been its own separate book. And my understanding is that Gomez is writing another book that is sort of continuing on from that little addendum, but it just felt a little out of place for me. I found it a bit jarring. So I think I give it 3 stars. I think I'm going to put it in there a 10, but because really I feel like it was a 10, except that added on ending was just a bit strange for me. That's the biggest sticking point for me. Otherwise, I really enjoyed it. Okay, next up here we have Ariadne by Jennifer Saint, and this is a retelling of Greek mythology. I liked this book, but I didn't love it. This one's kind of the opposite of the Gilda Stories, where most of the book I was pretty underwhelmed, and then the ending I thought was fantastic and sort of redeemed the book for me a little bit, but wasn't quite enough to make up for most of the book being pretty meh, in my opinion. So I think I'm gonna put this in, I'm serving hashtag the best I can do right now in the situation. It's not a bad book. It's just a little bland, and I think the author could have done a lot more with the material. And considering how great the ending was, I feel like the rest of the book could have at least been that great, you know? Then we have Minor Detail. This is the last or second last book I read in 2023 by a Palestinian author, Adania Shibli, and I loved this book. I thought it was so good. It's heartbreaking. It's very hard to read, devastating, but beautifully written, very stark and confronting in the best way that literature can be. And I think I'm going to put Minor Detail in no notes. It was fantastic, and I highly recommend it if you haven't read it. Then we have A Wizard of Earthsea, which was another book club pick. This was really fun. I didn't expect to love it as much as I did. I didn't think it was a perfect book, but I did really like it. And I think I'm going to put it in there 10, but it was very close to being a perfect book for me. But there were a couple little elements here and there that I wished could have been developed just a little bit more, that we got just a little bit more from certain characters and certain themes. I understand why we didn't, because it's a children's book. The other aspect that I wish we could have had more of was any female character at all, but apparently later in the series, we get a lot more focus on female characters. So very good book, very close to being a 5-star read. I was honestly shocked by how much I liked it, but definitely had some buts. So then we have The Davenports. This is a cute little historical romance. This one was okay. It was good. It had a lot of lost potential. It had 3 love stories that were basically the same love story over and over again, that had the exact same story beats, the exact same conflict, and the most interesting piece of the story, which was the historical context of the time, the socio-political climate of the time around civil rights, was very much put on the back burner, which I understand because it's a romance, but it just felt like we could have had a little bit more of that. And I think we could have had more of that if we'd focused on one of the 3 romances in this book, and then maybe the other romances had their own books. So I'm gonna put this one in, I'm serving hashtag the best I can do right now in this situation. I think the author did just about the best she could, having 3 full love stories happening in a single book and trying to establish the situation at the time. But I don't think that any of the love stories were served by being told all in the same book. Then we have Gutter Child. I really liked this book. I read it back in February of 2023. And for me, I think I ended up giving it 4 stars, but it was very close to a 5-star read. Definitely had a little bit more of a YA vibe than I typically enjoy in my books, but it was really well done. I think I'm going to put it in no notes because it was really fantastic. It explored institutionalized racism in a really unique and poignant way. And I mentioned it at the time, and I still feel that way, that this is a book that could definitely be taught in schools, maybe in elementary school, at the end of elementary school. It's written by a Canadian author. So yeah, big fan. And I really don't have many notes. You know, the fact that it feels more YA than adult to me is very morally neutral. So I'm going to leave it there. Moving on to Lessons in Chemistry. This is a book that I feel has very mixed reviews in the world. I know some people, including my best friend, who read this and thought it was just okay. I know people who hated it, whereas I read it and I thought it was fantastic. I really, really liked it. I loved the main character. I loved the setting. I loved the themes, and I found it pretty funny and engaging and also heartbreaking. So for me, this was great. It did exactly what I wanted it to do, and was also kind of a very weird book, which might be what turns a lot of people off, but I love I love a little weird in the books I read. So I'm going to put Lessons in Chemistry in no notes. I don't feel like I have really been shouting my love for this book from the rooftops. I've definitely talked about it a little bit. Maybe part of that is that I'm tempered by knowing that a lot of people didn't love this book, that it's not everyone's cup of tea, but I really liked it. Then we have We Are Not Like Them, which I read because my best friend was reading it, and I looked at the blurb and thought it sounded really interesting. And this one didn't really do it for me. I feel like it didn't go nearly far enough, considering it was exploring police brutality, specifically racially motivated violence by police, and also exploring interracial friendship and some of the complicated dynamics that can arise in those friendships. And my best friend and I are not the same race, and so I was really interested in seeing how it would explore that concept, because it's certainly something that comes up. Your experiences of the world are fundamentally different in a lot of ways, and it's just a factor, you know? It's a factor in your relationship in the way that it isn't when you're friends with someone of the same race as you. So I was looking forward to seeing how this book addressed it. I don't think it addressed it well at all, either of the main topics. I think it skirted around all of the bigger issues in a way that I honestly found really irksome, because the whole point of the book and the whole way it's sold to the public is that it's exploring these difficult issues, and then time and time again it backs away without fully engaging. So for me, I just felt like it didn't even remotely achieve what it had set out to do. So I'm going to put it in choices. It is a very clear choice to choose to write a book about very difficult, complex, emotionally charged topics like this, and then to be too cowardly to actually explore them properly. Choices were made. Then we have Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. I loved this book. This is another one that I think a lot of people hate. I can understand that, because the main characters are not the most likable people on the planet, but I thought it was fantastic. I really, really loved the whole game development aspect of it, as well as how unlikable the characters were, how complex they were, how real their dynamic felt. It was a codependent, toxic friendship that sometimes felt like it was more full of resentment than it was love, but there still was always that baseline of love. And I think it's the kind of relationship that isn't necessarily explored as much in literature as more positive versions of friendship. And these kinds of friendships exist. Relationships are complicated, and you know, especially people who are suffering from chronic illness and people who are suffering with mental illness, sometimes having close relationships with people who are going through a lot with their mental and or physical health can be really hard. And it's not all bunnies and rainbows, but that's real life. And I felt a lot of feelings reading this book. I thought it was beautiful. There were a lot of tears, and I would really, really highly recommend this one as well. So this one, it's either going to go into no notes or shout it from the rooftops, but I don't know. I feel like I also haven't really bashed y'all over the head with this one. Again, maybe similar to Lessons in Chemistry. I know that it's not everyone's cup of tea, so that could be part of it. But for now, I'm going to put it in no notes. I feel like I'm going to struggle with Shout It From the Rooftops, because I'm going to feel like I'm putting those books above these books, which I already absolutely love and are favorites, which is going to be hard for me. I don't like picking favorites. Y'all already know if you watch my book bracket videos, but It's fine. We'll get there when we get there. Okay, then we have Gallant, which is a YA fantasy. I read this for the 2022 Goodreads Choice Awards winners video. I think that's also the video that I read Lessons in Chemistry and Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. And I really liked this one. This is another one that really pleasantly surprised me. I thought I would like it. I like V.E. Schwab's writing for the most part, but I wasn't 100% sold going into it. And I was really blown away by how good this book was. It's very dark, very emotional, really great character work and compelling relationships, very atmospheric and eerie, and has some really beautiful art in the physical copy. So for me, this is going to be another no notes. Then we have Call Us What We Carry. This is a poetry collection, also read for that video. And this I really, really, really loved. I thought it was gorgeous. It's mostly poems addressing our collective experience living through a pandemic and also the experience of being a Black woman in America, specifically in the 2019 to 2021 time period. I'm not a huge poetry reader in general, but I am very moved by Amanda Gorman's poetry, and I loved this collection, so I'm going to put it in no notes. I thought it was gorgeous, and if you haven't read it, I would definitely recommend. Then we have Atlas of the Heart. This was my second attempt at reading Brene Brown. I've read one of her other books before, and I hated it with a burning passion. This one was better, but it wasn't as good as I wanted it to be. It's really meant to be an encyclopedia of emotions, which is right up my alley, but I didn't feel like it went deep enough into most of the emotions, and it had a variety of emotions that were very similar. I think it could have been more thorough. We could have had a deeper dive. And there were moments where it had, the shining beacon of this is what this book could be, but there were only fleeting moments. It wasn't the whole thing. I think I ended up giving this book 4 stars after I read it, mostly for those few shining beacon moments. But the longer I have gone since reading it, the more I felt unmoved and felt like it was a missed opportunity, because it's a very interesting concept for a book, I think. And there's a lot of potential to really go deep. And it just didn't go as far as I wanted. It also had a lot of stories from Brown's own life, which is fine, but I personally don't really care, to be honest. I don't know where I'm going to put this. I think I'm going to put it in I'm serving # the best I can do right now in this situation. There was an attempt made. I feel like maybe somebody else taking on this concept could have gone deeper. I'm not sure Brene Brown is capable of going deeper than this, which might get me hated on the internet. I know a lot of people are big fans of Brene Brown, but I so far do not get the hype. I find her work pretty surface level. That's just me though. Okay, then we have Bad Gays, A Homosexual History. This was read for the same Goodreads Choice Awards winners video last year. And this one is another one where it had a great concept. I really wanted to read about all of these gay historical figures and look at how homosexuality was viewed in these different time periods. But it ended up being less of a deep dive than I'd hoped for. Also felt a little bit like it was erasing bisexuals, because there were a lot of people included who could have been, might have been bisexual, that were sort of lumped in as also being gay because they ever had, a homosexual interaction, which, I'm not a huge fan of bisexual erasure personally. It also had a big lack in diversity in the historical figures featured. And quite a few of them, I feel like the concept was great. This idea of historical figures, especially specifically historical figures who were not good people, who happened to be gay. But so many of the historical figures highlighted didn't seem like bad people at all, and they never really explained why they were categorizing them as a bad gay. So the whole sort of framework of the book, the whole concept, didn't seem to align with the actual content in a way that I found a bit confusing. So I'm going to put it in I'm serving # the best I can do right now in this situation. It was fine. It was okay. It was good. Could have done more. For sure. Then we have Whites on Race and Other Falsehoods. This is a short essay, and this is very, very well done. I'm going to put this in no notes. Very good, very impactful. Covers a lot of similar subject matter to Call Us What We Carry, but in a different format, of course. I found it very thought-provoking, and I would highly recommend to my fellow white people to read it. Then we have Amatka. This is actually the first book I finished in 2023. It's sci-fi. It is gloriously weird, sapphic, dystopian. I really, really liked it. I'm going to put it in no notes. I thought this book was great. I feel like I almost never hear anyone talk about Karen Tidbeck, and I feel like I've never heard anyone talk about this book specifically before, at least on the bookish internet. So get on it. It's great. If you love sci-fi, dystopian fiction, weird books, you will probably enjoy this as much as I did. Moving on to the survivalists. This was a big disappointment for me. I was looking forward to it when I read the description. It sounded really interesting, but I honestly still don't really know what this book was about. I found it very confusing. I never really got on board with the writing style, with the vibe. I felt like I was constantly at odds with the narrative and the characters. It just didn't really work for me personally. So I'm going to put this in choices. I feel like this could have been really great. There were so many choices made that I just, not in a bad way necessarily, I just didn't understand them. I didn't understand why the choices were being made narratively with the character development. I was confusion. Then we have Severina by Rodrigo Ray Rosa. This was another book club pick, and this I really, really liked. I definitely had a little bit of a bone to pick with the representation of women in this book. My impression is that that was more so an attempt at characterization of the main character, giving them this quality of being a little objectifying of women rather than it coming from the author themselves. But I still found it a little uncomfortable to read, especially some of the early interactions with Severina and a little bit of the stalking quality. So I'm going to put it in there a 10, but it was a fantastic book, very strange, but very enjoyable. We had great discussions about it. It referenced about a million other books that I would love to read, but the treatment of women was unsettling. Ooh, then we have Hester. This is another book that I obviously hoped I would enjoy. That's why I decided to read it, but I didn't think I would love it as much as I did. I really, really, really liked this book. Sort of a retelling of the main character from The Scarlet Letter, which I have not read, and historical fiction. She's a character with synesthesia, and synesthesia has sort of been passed down in her family, and there were times where women in her family were persecuted as witches because of their synesthesia. And it's really a story about the strength of women, and Hester herself is a really interesting, lovable, dynamic character. I was talking about this book recently because for my 2023 Goodreads Choice Awards winners video that I put out earlier this year, Wayward was a winner in 2 categories, and I felt like Wayward was trying to do what Hester did and not doing as well. So for me, Hester is a really great read. Fantastic. I'm going to put it in no notes because I have no notes. It was a really great book. I feel like this one might be on the edge of coming up to shout it from the rooftops because I know I've actually talked about this book a lot. But for now, I'm just going to put it in no notes because I still feel weird about prioritizing one favorite over all the other favorites. It's like choosing a favorite child. How could I do such a thing? What's next? Okay, we have Scattered Minds. This is a book about ADHD. I did make a video talking about 4 books I read about ADHD after I got diagnosed. This one I'm gonna put in I'm serving hashtag the best I can do right now in this situation. This is a very controversial book. This author is very controversial in the world of ADHD. Check out my ADHD book video if you want to know all the details. It's too much to get into right now. But I personally got a lot out of it. Just anecdotally, I found it very cathartic. But I think a lot of the scientific information is not based on any actual science. So I'm going to put this in I'm serving hashtag the best I can do right now in this situation. Gabor Mate is not an expert in ADHD, nor is he a mental health professional. He is a family health doctor. So I think he did the best he could do in his situation, which is not an expert in ADHD, just someone who has it and has kids who have it and has treated patients who have it. And I think the book definitely has some value, but definitely has its flaws for sure. Scorched Grace. This book I'm going to put in choices. I think this book was a big disappointment. This book really set me up, really got me excited. It's a badass lesbian nun solving a murder. Sounds amazing, but it was not amazing. It was a bit of a mess. Sadly, I was very disappointed. The writing was just not nearly as good as I had hoped it would be. Okay, then we have Shades of Grey. This book was really great. I really, really loved it. I'm gonna put it in no notes. This is another sci-fi dystopian book, but this one has a lot more of a comedic tone, whereas Amatka is a lot more dreary in a good way. Good dreary. But Shades of Grey is very comedic, very funny, but also this dystopian world. And I really liked it. And I think the sequel is coming out soon, or has just come out. I don't know, but I need to read it. The Intimacy Experiment. This is a romance between a bisexual sex worker and a rabbi. And I thought that sounded great, but the book itself was very meh. So I'm going to put it in I'm serving hashtag the best I can do right now in this situation. It did something. I didn't hate it. I just didn't love it either. Next we have Monstrous Book 2. This is a graphic novel series that I am reading. And book 2 was just as good as book 1. I really loved it. All the monstrous volumes or books that I've read so far have gotten 5 stars, and I love them a lot. Sapphic, badass MC. It's speculative. It's like steampunk sci-fi fantasy with gods come down to this sort of alternate planet. It's not Earth. And there's this big war brewing between all these different factions, and our main character is going through a physical transformation. This definitely has some horror elements to it. It's really, really good. And there's an amazing found family quality to it that I just adore. It melts my heart. So no notes for my baby monstrous. Then we have Driven to Distraction, which is another book I read for my ADHD video. This one I'm gonna put it in choices. Some people love this book, and good for them. I'm sure this is very helpful to a lot of people. I found it boring as all heck. It was very hard to get through and didn't feel like it was well suited to ADHD readers at all. Then we have Parable of the Sower. This was another book club pick, and this one was really, really great. Very difficult to read, very emotionally draining to read, but very prescient and poignant, and had some really interesting ways of tying religion in with this idea of a sort of near future end stage climate change sort of societal collapse narrative. I am going to put it in no notes. It was really, really good, and I'm going to be reading the sequel soon, and it's going to be in a video. That video might come out before this one, so if it does, I'll link it down below, and if it doesn't, keep your eye peeled for it. Then we have Hidden Pictures. This one I read for the Goodreads Choice Awards video last year, and this one is the first one to go in the bottom category of What a Terrible Day to Have Eyes. This book is horrific on so many levels. It's terrible, and I hated it. It has a lot of dog whistles to a lot of harmful, hateful communities. It's racist and fatphobic and transphobic and atheist phobic, if that's even a thing. It was just, it was terrible. Would not recommend. Wish I could go back and scrub it from my brain. Then we have Love and Fury. It's funny that they're side by side, and I did actually read them back to back, I think, but both of these touch on very similar subject matter. Love and Fury was okay. I'm gonna put it in I'm serving hashtag the best I can do right now in the situation. I'm not sure how much of this book was subpar because the author didn't do the best job they could with the subject matter, or if Mary herself was just kind of a boring, unlikable person with a lot of internalized misogyny. Let me know if you know more about her. But I didn't love reading this book. I found the main character very, very difficult to like. She was very hypocritical. It was kind of depressing. So there's that. Then How to Think Like a Woman. This is another one where, honestly, I think I'm going to put this one in choices. I just feel like some strange choices were made here. This is supposed to be a book about 4 female philosophers, and it is, but they are barely talked about, and much more of the book time is spent on the author's love life and the disintegration of her marriage, which I didn't go into this thinking I was reading a memoir. But there was a lot in there, and we didn't get nearly as much detail into each of the 4 female philosophers as I'd wanted. What we got was interesting. It piqued my interest for sure. I would love to get more of a deep dive, but I thought this was the deep dive, you know? I walked away from this not really knowing what the philosophies of these 4 women actually were, which I thought was the purpose of the book. So choices were made here. It could have been great, but it missed the mark for me. Then we have A Radical Guide for Women with ADHD, also included in my ADHD video. This one's also going to go in choices. This is a book that is written for a very specific kind of woman, which I overlap with a little bit because I am a adult white woman with ADHD. I didn't grow up in a conservative American sort of religious household. I don't have a housewife sort of life where I'm trying to keep up with the Joneses. It's a very specific book, and I did not relate to the vast majority of it. And I'm not exactly sure why the book had to be so specific. I feel like it's not helpful for the vast majority of women who don't fit into that very narrow box of that specific archetype, you know? Strange choices. Then we have Taking Charge of Adult ADHD. This was my favorite book from that series of 4 ADHD books I read. This one's going to go in no notes. I thought this book was really well put together for people with ADHD, very easy to read in the format. It had so much valuable information. It was very reassuring, very validating, while also being upfront and blunt about the realities of ADHD. Incredibly helpful, and I would recommend it to anyone who has been diagnosed with adult ADHD, or if someone in your life has adult ADHD. Next up is Land of Love and Drowning. This was another book club pick, and this one was really good. Definitely had some disturbing content. That's the big but here. I think this book was really well written, really fascinating, a really beautiful story in a lot of ways, but some of the disturbing romantic relationships were very hard to read. And while I know why at least one of them was there and it makes sense for it to be there, in the context of the story, it was really hard to read. And the second one, I'm not sure actually did need to be there. So that's I'm trying not to give spoilers or get this video demonetized. So that's Land of Love and Drowning. Very good book. Definitely some things to keep in mind there. Then, The Collected Regrets of Clover. I love this book. I feel like this is one that I have talked about a lot. And I know this is another one that not everyone gets. Some people just find it a little trite and it didn't work for them. I think for me personally, where I'm at currently in my life and dealing with a lot of anticipatory grief in my life right now, unfortunately, for family members with terminal illness, this book hit really hard. It's all about grief and I found it really beautiful. And the main character is a little unlikable, but she grows throughout the story. I think this one's going to go into Shout It from the Rooftops. I feel like I have talked about this book a lot, and I know it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, but if you are looking to read something on grief right now, if you're grieving yourself, I think while this might be a hard book to read as you're actively grieving, it also might be a little reassuring or comforting or cathartic for you, like it was for me. All right, moving on to, Luster. I feel like y'all know where this is going to go. This definitely has to go into Shout It from the Rooftops because I've talked about it so much, I feel like, on my channel. This one, I expected to like it, but it was still a little bit of a sleeper hit. I didn't expect to be quite so moved by it, and I think part of it was the element of Esther, the main character, being a visual artist, a painter, and the passages about painting I found really moving and gorgeous. But it's really a story about a young Black woman who is facing a lot of inner turmoil and trying to kind of grow into her fully realized self and going through it. I found it very darkly comedic and entertaining while also being very poignant and diving deep and really developing this character in a very thorough, complex, beautiful way. So I love Luster. I feel like I've talked about it a lot on my channel and I definitely highly, highly recommend. I read Luster in a reading vlog. I think it was my physical TBR reading vlog, which is also when I read The Collected Regrets of Clover and this next book, The Bloody Chamber. So The Bloody Chamber, I'm going to put into There 10, but I really liked this collection. It's feminist fairy tale retellings, and most of them I really loved, but there were a couple that didn't quite click for me. Some of the stories in the collection were just a little less impactful for me personally, but there were some in there that were absolutely fantastic masterpieces, incredible. There are 10, but some of the stories weren't quite as amazing as others. Okay, then we have Loot. This is a book that I'm going to put in choices. This was a really great concept and it failed miserably in my opinion, and the end was a choice. And the romance was a choice. Many choices were made that I side-eyed heavily reading this book. Lost in the Moment and Found. This is probably my favorite book in the Wayward Children series, and I'm gonna put it in either No Notes or Shout It from the Rooftops. Maybe Shout It from the Rooftops. I feel like I've talked about this book a lot for good reason. It's fantastic. It's beautiful. It's heartbreaking. Probably my absolute favorite from this whole series, which is a favorite series of mine in general. House of Hunger. This one is another one that was a bit of a sleeper hit. I'm gonna put it in There Are 10, but it was a very, very good book. I liked a lot about it, but it didn't quite get there for me. It wasn't quite a 5-star read. There were a couple little things here and there that I was feeling pretty nitpicky about, so I don't feel like I can quite put it in No Notes because I definitely had notes, but it was a really great book. And if you like sapphic vampires, this is a book for you. Very fun and very dark. Where the Drowned Girls Go. This one was not my favorite in the Wayward Children series. This series can be a bit hit or miss for me. I really love it in general, but there are definitely a couple novellas in the series that are just not quite my thing. And this one I just found a little meh, to be honest. So I'm gonna put this one in, I'm serving hashtag the best I can do right now in this situation. We tried, not for me. which is fine. Hide. This is another one that I feel like is really controversial. Maybe not controversial, but contentious. I don't know. People have very mixed feelings about this book. A lot of people seem to really hate it. I thought it was great. It's a horror novel taking place in an abandoned theme park, and there's some unnamed monster taking people out one at a time. I found it really scary. I found the characters really fun and interesting. I really enjoyed it, but you might be able to guess what category it goes in. There are 10, but 2 of the characters had the same name for no reason whatsoever, and it came up over and over and over again, and the author had to keep finding new and unique ways to distinguish between the 2 characters with the same name who didn't have to have the same name for any reason, and it was just a bit of a gimmick that got old really fast. So that was my butt in this situation. Otherwise, I thought this book was very entertaining. Entangled Life. This was another one of our book club picks. This is a nonfiction book about fungi, and it was really great. I'm going to put it in no notes. It was beautifully written, very interesting information. It covered a lot more philosophical topics than I expected it to, and just really got really deep into the nitty-gritty details, which is something I love from nonfiction, and just really, like I said, beautifully written, much more beautifully written than I expected it to be, and quite a few of the descriptions of various landscapes really kind of blew me away with how gorgeous they were. So no notes from me. This book is great. If you're interested in fungi, I would recommend. Then we have L'énigme de la chambre 622, which I read in French. It is a mystery, and it was really fun. I really liked this book. It is a little bit ridiculous. It's very long, and some of the choices near the end got a little out of hand in how over the top they were. So I think I'm going to put it in there a 10, and the but is that, did it really need to be that long? Straight. This is a purge-like horror novel with lots of LGBTQIA plus characters, very graphic and gory. I feel a bit conflicted on this one, to be honest. It was good, but it didn't quite deliver what I was expecting going into it. It left me a little bit cold at the end. It just didn't pull me in enough, I don't think, to really feel the feelings that the characters were feeling. Maybe it was just because of the length, I'm not sure, but I feel like it belongs somewhere in here. I just feel kind of neutral on it. I think I'm going to put it in I'm serving hashtag the best I can do right now in this situation. I think it could have given us more. Ooh, next one. Okay, I think we all know where this one goes. Monstrilio is amazing. Probably, actually, yes, I was going to say probably my favorite book of 2023. I think we determined that it's my absolute favorite book of 2023. It definitely goes in. Shout it from the rooftops. I don't think I have shut up about this book since I read it, and for good reason, because it is incredible literary horror. So good. Beautiful writing, really interesting characters and relationship dynamics, just absolutely deeply compelling, exploring grief on a whole other level, monstrous transformation and some really weird stuff and a little bit of gore. And I've had some really great feedback from y'all who have read it because I've mentioned it in so many videos, who have also loved it and thanked me for mentioning it so much because it's a book they otherwise wouldn't have read, but because I wouldn't stop talking about it, they finally picked it up and they loved it. So this is your sign. Even if you think this is not your kind of book, maybe give it a try, because it is amazing, and that's why I won't stop talking about it, and it definitely belongs in Shout It From the Rooftops. It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover goes in What a Terrible Day to Have Eyes. I read this book in my Giving for Overrated Authors One More Shot video, and Colleen Hoover is definitely at the top of the list of overrated authors, in my opinion. And yeah, this book was terrible in so many ways. You can check out that video if you want the long laundry list, but I would happily erase this from my brain. A Restless Truth. This is a sapphic romance. It's a follow-up to another fantasy queer romance, and both of them are fun. Definitely not my favorite books of all time or my favorite romances of all time, but quite enjoyable. I think I'm going to put it in there a 10, but I feel like the romance here was really well done and some of the surrounding plot was well done, but I feel like we needed a little bit more from the plot. The time was not balanced well enough there. There was just a little bit of something missing for me, but I really liked the characters. I liked the romance, and it was just kind of a fun romp, you know? Both literally and figuratively. Then Normal People by Sally Rooney. This is another one I read for my Giving Overrated Authors One More Shot, and I really don't like this book. Personally, I give it 2 stars. It goes somewhere between What a Terrible Day to Have Eyes and Choices. I'm probably going to put it in Choices because I just feel like so many strange choices that I don't understand were made in this book. All the characters are awful. The ways that certain topics were handled, especially one of the main characters' eating disorders, were baffling. And their relationship makes no sense to me. I don't understand why they're together, and there are no quotation marks in the whole book. And I don't like that. I find it very confusing and annoying. So choices were made. The Martian by Andy Weir. This was pleasantly surprising after how much I hated Project Hail Mary. I hated that book. I know lots of people love it. Don't try to convert me. I've heard enough times why people think it's the best sci-fi ever written. I hate that book. Do not try me. But The Martian was better. It was better. Was it perfect? No, it was not. I'm going to put it in I'm serving hashtag the best I can do right now in this situation. I feel like this is the pinnacle of Andy Weir's capabilities as an author, and it was a solid book. But I think the more he tries to push himself to write different books than this exact thing, the worse the books get. The Body is Not an Apology. This one I'm also going to put into I'm serving hashtag the best I can do right now in this situation in a less shady way than The Martian. This book just didn't go as far as I wanted it to go. It's kind of like Atlas of the Heart. Good concept, delivered a little bit of what I wanted, but left me wanting more. This one just didn't quite do it for me. It's very good as an entryway into body positivity or neutrality if you are new to the concepts completely. But if you know anything about these movements, if you've been involved in them at all, if you've read about them at all, you're going to find this very entry level and basic. Death in Her Hands. This was also in my Giving Overrated Authors One More Shot video. This, I think, was my favorite book in that video of the 4. I'm going to put this in there a 10, but this was a really interesting book. I liked a lot about it, but there were a couple things that didn't quite work for me, a couple little choices that I wasn't totally on board with, but it was way better than the other book I read by Otessa Moshfegh, which was A Year of Rest and Relaxation, which I hated so much. This is a much better book. Not a perfect book. Much better book, though. Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail. This is a really cute little romance. I really like it. Sapphic romance, part of a trilogy. All 3 of them are really fun. This one I'm going to put in there a 10, but really enjoyed this book. But the way that characters were introduced with a laundry list of all of their identities felt very unnatural and was jarring. The Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School. This one was really good. This one actually also pleasantly surprised me. It was a lot more poignant and emotional than I expected it to be. And I think this one is, honestly, I might put this one in no notes. I feel like my only real note is that it feels a bit young for me because it is a YA novel, and that feels like not a fair reason to put it in a lower category. So I'm going to put it in no notes. I thought this book was really great and I would highly recommend it. I think the sibling relationship in particular is really beautiful. Glassworks. This is a really weird book. It's very interesting, but it kind of lost the plot a bit at one point. I think it refound the plot eventually, but I was definitely a little confused for a portion of this book. I'm going to put it in there a 10, but I think it could have been a little tighter. I think it could have used a little more editing, streamlined it a little bit more. But I thought it was a really interesting concept of sort of following these characters, sort of a generational story. There were some really beautiful moments that stick in my mind and some really gorgeous writing, but it was a little confusing and a little meandering at times. So 100 Years of Solitude. This book is amazing. This was another book club pick. It is very famous. It's a classic of South American literature. I am going to move it all the way up to Shout It from the Rooftops, because this book is fantastic and I feel like I've talked about it quite a bit since I finished it. Maybe not quite as much as Mausoleo, although I'm not sure I've talked about any book as much as I've talked about Mausoleo, but 100 Years of Solitude was really beautiful and very emotionally draining in the best possible way. And the ending in particular absolutely blew me away. I thought the ending was one of the most gorgeous endings to a book I have ever read. If you haven't read it yet, please go do so. Next up, we have Organ Meats. This is a very weird book, which for me is usually a good thing. This one took the weirdness into more of a gross place, and I also felt like it didn't quite fully deliver on some of the themes that I felt it was striving for. I found it a little more confusing than innovative. I feel like it tried to be so different that it kind of got to the point where I'm not sure anyone could fully follow what the author was trying to say other than the author herself. I'm going to put it in I'm serving hashtag the best I can do right now in this situation. situation, mostly for how I felt while I was reading it. I feel like I was doing my absolute best to follow, and I was getting confused over and over again. We by Yevgeny Zamyatin. This is a old classic of Russian literature that inspired 1984. It's all about a dystopian future, and the author was picking up on some of the slowly building dynamics in Soviet Russia. This was a really good book, but definitely of its time. I'm going to put it in there a 10 but. I thought this book was really great in a lot of ways and really interesting, but it definitely wasn't a perfect book, and the racism and sexism were very blatant and at times were very difficult to get through. Next up, we have The New Me, and this one was pretty meh for me at the time, but honestly, the more time it goes by, the more meh I feel about it. I think I'm going to put it in I'm serving hashtag the best I can do right now in this situation. I thought this book was a pretty boring take on the subject matter of reinvention culture and ennui. It was Iris Kelly Doesn't Date. This is the third book in the trilogy. It comes after Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail. I'm going to put it in there a 10 but as well. Same reason as Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail. Introducing every character by their race and then their sexual and gender identities felt very robotic and strange. On top of that, I felt like the ending of this book was not as satisfying as I wanted. The two other couples from the first and second book got a more satisfying conclusion because they kind of carried through the next two. This couple really didn't get sort of an official happy ending. We didn't really know what was going to happen with them. And all of Stevie's friends were terrible. Part of me feels like I should move it down, but I did actually really love the central romance between Iris and Stevie. I thought it was really sweet and beautiful and lovely. There was just a lot of peripheral things that bothered me, and the ending was kind of unsatisfying. So there are 10 but. The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. This was a book club pick that we were trying to solve the mystery together, which is really fun. I'm going to put this one in no notes. This was a really fun book. I really enjoyed it. I did theorize the murderer, but I didn't figure out all the ways that the murderer committed the murder, how they made everything work. And it was really fun and intriguing and a good, solid mystery. Next is Kai K. I read this book twice in 2023. I read it first in January, I think, and then I read it again in the summer as a book club pick with my book club. And both times I really loved it. I'm going to put it in no notes. It's a fantastic book, a feminist retelling of the Ramayana, and Kai K is a really awesome, strong female character who is very unique, is asexual, which is nice. Also has this really complex relationship to motherhood that I found very fascinating. Really good book. Then Wild Spaces. This is I don't remember if it's a novella or just a shorter novel. It's a coming of age story that explores generational trauma and abuse, as well as having a horror element of a monstrous transformation. This is definitely a very difficult book to read. It's very sad and upsetting, but I also found it really beautiful. It reminds me of Monstrilio in a couple of ways. They're definitely not super similar books, but I think they have a lot of similar elements and quite a bit of overlap in a variety of areas. But I'm going to put this in no notes. I thought Wild Spaces was really great, and I have barely heard anyone talking about it, which is sad. Silver Nitrate. This one is going to go into, I think I'm going to put it into choices. I've read a couple Silvia Moreno Garcia books at this point, and I have not really been able to vibe with her horror books, whereas the one book I read that was a different genre, which was The Beautiful Ones, it's more sort of fantasy, historical fiction with a little dash of romance, that I felt I could really connect to on a different level. I felt like it aligned with my preferences a lot better. I feel like with both of her horror novels that I've read, there's just something missing for me. They don't quite go all the way. There are choices made in both of them that I feel kind of robs some of the terror from the story. And in Silver Nitrate, I just feel like the vast majority of the page count was focused on the wrong thing, and I didn't really feel any of that tension, eeriness, fear. I thought the direction it went in was a little strange, and I didn't understand why the romance that happened had to happen. I just didn't connect to it at all, really. Next up is The Trap, which is a thriller, and this one I'm going to put in choices as well. I feel like this had potential, and there were a couple little aspects of it that I really liked, but I just felt like for the most part, it missed the mark for me. Didn't deliver what I was hoping for sure. A Dead Gin in Cairo was really great. I'm going to put it in there 10, but I feel like this book was really great, except it was very much limited by the length. It was very short, and I felt like it needed more time to expand on the world building and the character development and really get us up to date with everything that was happening and really get us invested. So I know this is sort of the beginning of a series, and I imagine as the series continues, P. Djeli Clark is really able to establish all of those things and really root in, because I've read P. Djeli Clark's writing before and it blew me away. So I feel like I know it's in there, you know? But this one, to me, I think it was a 10, but definitely limited by the short page count. Until the Last of Me, this is a sequel to a book that I really loved, and this was a disappointment. I'm going to put it in choices. I just feel like the first book established some really interesting world building, some really fascinating characters, and this mystery of what they were protecting or what they were trying to achieve on Earth, and went through some really fascinating points in history and places to try to achieve their ends. And the second book sort of split focus between two different family lines, and then really didn't dive into either one in a satisfying way to me, and didn't really do the same thing where we get to see really amazing moments in history firsthand. Felt a little more meandering, it felt a little more low stakes, and just wasn't nearly as engaging as the first book. So I'm really hoping the third one sort of comes back with a vengeance and finishes off this series strong, because the second one made a lot of choices that made me a little sad. Mad Honey, I'm going to put it into there a 10, but I thought this book was really well done, very interesting exploration of the subject matter, some really lovely metaphors, but I found the ending very frustrating for spoilery reasons. So they're a 10, but that ending hurt me viscerally. The Center, I'm going to put this in, I'm serving hashtag the best I can do right now in the situation. I had high hopes for this book. I think it could have been really interesting, but it just felt a little unfocused. I think it tried to do too many things in one book. There was some content included that made me very uncomfortable, and I'm not sure why it needed to be there. And then I think we could have been made more uncomfortable with some of the subject matter. I think it was really ripe with potential for making us uncomfortable in a great way, to explore the themes, but it didn't really take us there. Didn't quite commit fully to the premise for me. Monkey Beach. This was a book club pick and is gorgeous. It's absolutely beautiful. I am going to put it into no notes. It was a favorite of the year. Beautifully written, exploring some really heartbreaking subject matter. An Indigenous author from BC here in Canada. I would highly recommend it. It's very literary, very atmospheric, and very heartfelt and emotional. Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I have a whole video talking about my thoughts on Fourth Wing. A whole very long video just for this one book. So you can go check that out for the full experience. But I'm going to put Fourth Wing in choices, because those dragons were amazing, great potential with the dragons, and then so many strange choices were made with the characters and the relationships that really took away from everything that it had going on. It was very disappointing. I would almost put it in What a Terrible Day to Have Eyes, just for some of the writing choices that blew me away with how ridiculous they were, but I don't think it's quite on that level. Next we have How to Keep House While Drowning, which is a nonfiction book for people with ADHD and keeping on top of housework. For me personally, I didn't find this helpful at all. I know lots of people love this book, but I just didn't find it to be my cup of tea. I think I'm going to put it into choices. Not for me. The Butterfly House, I'm also going to put in choices. I didn't love how mental illness was represented in this book. I felt like that was a real choice. These Violent Delights is going to go into there a 10, but this was a fantastic book. I gave it 4 stars. I read this in my Dark Academia video. It was very thought-provoking. There was one aspect that's a bit spoilery about the two central characters and about their dynamic that I wish had been handled another way, or I was really waiting for that final piece to be slotted in to complete the puzzle, and that final piece never came. So for me, they're a 10, but there was just one little inkling of a piece missing that would have made it absolutely perfect in my mind. The Maidens. Choices. So many terrible choices. A therapist who is awful with people. So much misdirection that actually made very little sense. An over-the-top evil villain. Actually, you know what? There's so many choices made that I think, just what a terrible day to have eyes. Why? This book was a mess. It was an absolute mess. Just no. This was also my Dark Academia reading vlog. Island of the Blue Dolphins. This is a childhood favorite. and I am blinded to any issues in it because I love it. So it goes in no notes because I love Island of the Blue Dolphins. It's one of my favorite books ever. Ordinary Monsters was also in my Dark Academia reading vlog. I really, really liked this book. I'm going to put it in no notes. I thought it was great in pretty much every way. Beautifully written, loved the characters, really interesting world building and magic system, just fantastic. The Atlas Paradox is a sequel to the Atlas 6, and I read this also for my Dark Academia reading vlog. I'm going to put it in choices. I just feel like so many questionable choices were made in this book. So many interesting characters were given total personality transplants in this book. Very little happened plot-wise. I don't know, the whole thing was a choice. It was a choice. The Jewel and her lapidary is going to get, I'm serving hashtag the best I can do right now in this situation. I feel like this is another similar situation to A Dead Djinn in Cairo, which is just that this book was too complex for this short format. The Girl with All the Gifts and The Boy on the Bridge, and they are both zombie apocalypse books with a lot more heart than you would expect, and they both surprised me a huge amount. I'm going to put The Girl with All the Gifts in Shout It from the Rooftops. Honestly, it was one of my favorite books of the year. It was really, really great. Very surprised by how good it was. And I'm going to put The Boy on the Bridge in no notes because it was also fantastic. Rock, Paper, Scissors. This book is going into choices. This had such a good premise and it just threw it away. It made the weirdest choices that made no sense. And the perfect choices were right there, within reach, and the author was just like, no, let me reach past that to something that makes no sense. That's perfect. When she had this amazing premise right there. So many choices. Never Let Me Go is going to go into, that's hard. I'm thinking somewhere between no notes and there are 10, but I did give this book 4 stars. I'm going to put it in there a 10 but, because while I think this book ended really strong, the beginning and middle were pretty rambling. It took a long time to get to the good stuff, which is okay. I don't mind a book taking its time, but I think this book could have used a little more sauce in the beginning and in the middle, given us a few more breadcrumbs to lead us to the end, but the ending was fantastic. The World We Make by N.K. Jemisin, the sequel in a duology, urban sci-fi fantasy, really, really great. I'm going to put this in no notes. I thought it was great. I loved this duology. I think it's fantastic. I highly recommend it if you haven't read any N.K. Jemisin. The City We Became is the first one. Very, very good. La Belle et la Bête, both the original version and the children's version. This is from my reading in French video. Actually, all 4 of the books are here together. Both versions of Beauty and the Beast, I'm going to put in I'm serving hashtag the best I can do right now in this situation. They both had their flaws for different reasons and are a result of their time. Elsie Une Dernière Fois, I'm also going to put in I'm serving hashtag the best I can do right now in this situation. I really liked this book. It's a mystery. It has a really beautiful relationship between the main character and her grandmother-like figure, her neighbor, that I really loved and was sort of dealing with grief. But the ending was so rushed and the supernatural elements were kind of shoved in there in a way that, I don't know, I felt like there could have been a little bit more nuance, a little more build up. Everything was kind of one note, an interesting note and a note I enjoyed, but one note, and then all of a sudden everything happened at once. Very suddenly, things escalated, and the main character made some choices at the end that were questionable. And then Les Misanthropes par Molière. This is going in no notes. I love this play. It's a favorite of mine. I find it so funny. I highly recommend if you haven't read it, although I do think it's better in the original French. Woman Eating. I'm going to put this in I'm serving hashtag the best I can do right now in this situation. This book had a lot of potential. It explored some interesting themes. It's a different take on the vampire, but some of the choices with the main character and the romantic entanglement were questionable, and I didn't really understand why that was happening. Actually, I'm going to put it in choices. Because some of those choices that were made, I feel like really took away from the larger thematic tapestry that the author was constructing. Okay, now I have a couple books from my horror reading vlog that I posted around Halloween. First, we have The Fall of the House of Usher, which I'm putting in no notes. It's a fantastic short story by Edgar Allan Poe. Devil House by John Darnielle, I'm putting in there are 10 but. This was a really, really good book, but the Old English parts were confusing, and I still don't know what was happening with all of that. Rouge by Mona Awad gets no notes. I thought it was fantastic. I love Mona Awad, and I loved this book. Exploring Eurocentric beauty standards and complex mother-daughter relationships with a bit of a sci-fi horror element. Really good. Then we have Carmilla. This is also a no notes. The original vampire story, and it's a sapphic vampire story, and we love that for us. A Haunting on the Hill. Choices were made. You can go watch my Halloween horror reading vlog to hear me rant about some of the choices in this book. I was very annoyed. Let's just say that. We have Survivor Type by Stephen King. What a Terrible Day to Have Eyes. Just gonna leave it there. The White People by Arthur Machen. This is a short story. I'm gonna put this in no notes. This one has really stuck with me over the months. Very eerie and creepy and strange and horrifying. The Dunwich Horror, I'm gonna put in there a 10, but I think this book had a really horrifying, awesome monster, but the lead up to it was a little bit dry. For my taste. I felt like I needed more. A Whistle and I'll Come to You, My Lad. This is a no notes short story. I loved this short story. Genuinely terrifying, and considering how the scary thing in this book is represented, it's kind of funny to me how scary I found it, but it was really scary. We only have a couple books left to go. So Legends and Lattes, this was a reread. I had already read this book, but it was our book club pick, I think in January. And I'm gonna put Legends and Lattes all the way up in Shout It From the Rooftops. I feel like I've talked about this book so much, but for good reason. I love it. It is cozy and amazing and beautiful and lovely, and everyone should read it. Then we have The Push. This was another book club pick. This is a thriller, sort of a motherhood thriller, and I think I'm going to put it in there a 10, but I would have loved the ending to be something slightly different from what it was. I think the ending was a little too cut and dry, and I would have loved a little more ambiguity, personally. Lone Women, this one I am going to put into, this is a horror. I'm going to put it in I'm serving #the best I can do right now in this situation. This book had a lot to give. It was very interesting, but I feel like the main, actually, you know what? No, I'm going to put it in choices because I feel like the main horror element here, the setting, should have delivered the horror. The idea of being a lone Black woman on the frontier where you never know who is going to ride over the horizon and you're just alone in your tiny little house and there's no one for miles around was really ignored for the monster in a box horror. But then even that horror was revealed far too early for my taste. I don't know. Choices were made. I feel like we focused on the wrong things, you know? And the right things were right there. You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight. This is a YA horror. And I'm going to put this in choices as well, just because the ending was a huge choice. I do not know why it ended that way. I was enjoying the book. It was sort of a turn your brain off thriller horror. And then the ending happened and I was like, excuse me? Am I just supposed to go along with that? It's kind of like Loot. What in the world was that ending? I don't know. The September House. I'm going to put in there a 10, but this was a really interesting book in a lot of ways. I talked about this one in I read it for the horror nominees, the Goodreads Choice Awards horror nominees video. This had a lot going for it. The haunted house was a really interesting metaphor for some of the other subject matter, but I found some of the choices to do with the main character's relationship with her daughter a little off-putting. That was sort of the major drawback for me from a book that otherwise I thought was really well done. Dead 11. This one is definitely a choices book. This was such a huge disappointment. It had so much potential. It could have been so incredible, and it just made the weirdest choices left and right. Why? I'm so disappointed. I was so excited for this book and it just did not deliver at all. Okay, last two books. Oh my gosh, I'm about to lose my voice, so I'm glad we're nearing the end. Okay, we have Natural Beauty. This one I am putting in, hang on. Shout It From the Rooftops. I feel like even though this is a more recent read, I have talked about it so much. I read this also in my Goodreads Choice Awards horror nominees video from the end of last year. And I buddy read this book with Jenny from This Story Ain't Over and obsessed with this book. I think it's so fantastic. It does a lot of similar things to Rouge, but it had some extra themes in there, especially with the main character's relationship to her immigrant parents and her connection to music as a pianist. Those elements added a lot to the story. Otherwise, it explored a lot of the same themes as Rouge with Eurocentric beauty standards. It did have a bit more of a monstrous transformation, sort of body horror element to it, which I really liked within the context of the book. I thought it added to it. Both it and Rouge are 5-star books for me, but Natural Beauty has definitely stuck in my brain a lot more. And now we're into the final book, our last little book, Highly Suspicious and Unfairly Cute. I read this in February, I think. It is a YA romance, and it was cute. It was very cute. I'm gonna put it in, where am I gonna put it? I don't know. I think I'm gonna put it in There Are 10 But, and the but is I don't get the main character's TikTok. Can someone explain to me what the purpose of her TikTok is? She has a TikTok account about conspiracy theories, which she seems to be spreading, but she doesn't seem to actually believe in. And I have a lot of questions about that. But other than that, I thought their romance was really adorable. I liked both of them and their dynamic, and I thought it was very cute. So that brings us to the end. This is our finished ranking. Amazing. I need to make it even smaller because we can't see everything again. Here we go. Okay, now it's teeny tiny, but we can see everything at once. Those are all the books that I read in 2023 and how I would rank them on this totally subjective, random set of tiers. I feel pretty good about this, so I'm just gonna lock this in. This is my final ranking of all the books I read in 2023. Don't forget to check out my 1-sentence reviews videos if you want sort of more succinct reviews of each and every one of these books. You can also add me as a friend on Goodreads to read my reviews there. Let me know if you enjoyed this video. Like it if you liked it, and subscribe if you haven't already. If you want to see more tier ranking videos, let me know, and let me know what kind of things you'd want to see me tier rank. One of my ideas was ranking all of the 5-star books I've ever read, every book I've ever given 5 stars, which would be agonizing for me, probably, but probably entertaining. And if you have other things you'd want me to rank, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you as always to my patrons for your support. Don't forget to join us on Patreon if you want to be part of our book club, because as you can see, our book club picks like 100 Years of Solitude and Legends and Lattes and Giovanni's Room, Entangled Life, and The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, and Kai K, and Monkey Beach, etc. So many of them are ranked at the top of my list. We pick some really fantastic books, and not only do we get to read the fantastic books, but we get to talk about them as a group, have discussions that usually last 2 to 3 hours that are always incredibly thought-provoking and awesome. So consider it. And with that, I'm gonna get going. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye, friends.